Hi y'all, welcome back to the garden. So today's video is going to be pretty fun. I think we're going to go over kind of some changes to this garden in the past 2 years. Can you believe I've already been here 2 years? So we moved into this property at the very end of July of 2023. So I've had 2 full growing seasons. This morning I posted a photo on Instagram of some frost. We did have frost last night for the first time, but it did not appear, now that I've gotten home from work, to be a hard enough frost to kill off annuals. So there are some annuals that are a little toasted and their blooms are burnt up, and we'll take a look at those. But they're still like sweet potato vines, which, because it didn't get super, I think it was about 37 degrees. So although we had a frost, it didn't get below or at freezing to kind of seriously damage the tissues of the plant. But we're going to put some throwback footage on the video as we're walking today to show kind of some befores and afters. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the things I've done primarily in this front garden space, although we'll take a little look around the back towards the end of the video. So let's get started. So the days are ending much quicker now that we're reaching the end of October. I can't do a whole lot after work. And it's been super breezy, which tends to happen here in Southwest Ohio as the seasons change. And so it's difficult to get out and shoot videos with a microphone and that type thing. And also when it's overcast and the wind's blowing and it's 50 degrees outside, it's not super comfortable for the body either. But I had come out the other day, I disassembled, or not disassembled, but shut down the fountain. I want to come out and pressure wash the fountain in preparation before I cover it for spring. You don't necessarily have to cover your concrete fountains, but it will extend the life of them, because if they get water in them and that water freezes because the fountain's not properly sealed, it could crack, and then you're left with a beautiful lawn ornament that doesn't really work. So I always cover mine, even though it isn't so pretty for the protection value. I've started removing my hoses. I've cut back on some of my irrigation because I haven't winterized it yet, but I want to make sure before I do that I give everything a nice drink of water. I've also been working on some irrigation issues in this front garden bed, so let's talk about it. So if you've been following me since I moved into this property, you know everything is new in this garden space except like these boxwoods right here and the Japanese maple back here. I had little in the garden except some big viburnums on the front of the house that I removed, and this entire bed is completely new as of 2 years ago. So when I was designing this garden space, I knew I wanted it to be big and dramatic, but I initially started with one irrigation zone, and that was for mostly the trees because they were planted first at the fall of 2023. And then as I started adding shrubs and perennials the next year and annuals, I needed to divide that irrigation zone into 2 zones. So primarily the first irrigation zone is this right here, but it also kind of creeps around and does this area of the house. And so what I'm running into is, because the irrigation valve box is on the side of the house down there, and the actual origination point for the water pressure tank, since we were on well, is in the barn. Water travels all the way around the barn to the side of the house, and then it goes up in irrigation tubing to irrigate this garden bed. So I've traditionally been able to get away with more feet than is recommended to put on a zone, but there is a lot of irrigation tubing in this bed because it is quite large. And so what I'm running into this year, you may notice I have a dogwood here that had lost all its leaves because we had such a hot and dry summer once it stopped raining. And so there's difficulty with pressurization in this bed, and I need to work on splitting this up more. So there's one zone that's just from like this area over, and zone 2, that area over. And I've reduced the pressure or the irrigation in zone 2 when I planted the hydrangea hedge over here, the Incredible Stormproof, a few weeks ago. I added a new valve to my valve box last week. I ran new irrigation to that bed, and then I trenched across to the hydrangea trials bed and took that off zone 2 and put it on its own separate zone with the hydrangea hedge over here. So I could expand on that zone if I wanted to, because the hydrangeas were taking up quite a bit of irrigation from zone 2. So now I can move things that are on from zone 1 to zone 2. Now, all that being said, it's not going to be simple. It's been 2 years since I put in most of this irrigation for zone 1. Started in the fall of 2023, and then I did most of the perennial and shrub irrigation in the spring of 2024. I remember somewhat where some of the irrigation lines are, not completely. So there'll be some work for me to do in spring, but the valves are ready to go. And I know what I need to do to make that work. And so we'll work on that in the spring now that I've lessened the burden on zone 2. And the reason, outside of this dogwood and some other things in here that I noticed were suffering a little bit, is I did dig up and move the desert orchid El Nino from Proven Winners program. You can see, and you may have noticed, the large hole down here. The roots on that thing, I will show some photos of them, were insane, and it was only 2 years old. So if you're planting one of those, it got big incredibly quickly, and the roots are as big as my wrist, and I ended up having to saw those apart. And you can actually see, let me turn the camera around, how far the roots spread. So this right here, I left it for y'all to see. It's just one of the feeder roots, and you can see how far from where the plant was planted, how far that reached out in a couple seasons, and it goes even further through there. I got to fill this hole up a little bit. I left all this because I wanted y'all to see it, but in the process of digging that up, I did cut an irrigation line in two, and then as part of running that line to clean out the dirt when I was done and recoupling it, I just noticed that water was not flowing good in this pipe, and so there's not enough pressure in the system for everything to get an even distribution of water. That's something you have to watch for irrigation. So this was the original line that I ran in fall 2023. I know because it circles only the trees in the garden bed that I planted that fall so I could get them watered before winter. So in January of 2024, I put out a video, I think it was January, I got started early that year, of some designs for this bed I was looking for. And I think I did a pretty good job of accomplishing that. There's been a few changes in here. The dogwood was changed out to a different variety because the one I had was just so small, and I've actually lost that dogwood since, so it wasn't incredibly hardy. It didn't survive very well here. It was struggling in that same spot, so there may just be a little bit of a soil thing here I need to work on and test. I did also take out a Venus dogwood. That dogwood was small as well. I purchased it from like a third party locally that wasn't like a regular nursery, and it wasn't doing incredibly well either. And so I moved it to the back. It has since died as well, and so I did replace it though with a magnolia. This magnolia is Bracken Brown Beauty. Other than Edith Bogue, it is one of the only varieties of magnolia that we can take up here in our cold weather. It's hardy down to zone 6. It did survive winter last year pretty well, but it did lose a lot of leaves from winter. I had one of these at my last house in the first winter. It went through winter, also didn't do very well. So they take a little while to get established. If you're going to plant one, I would recommend planting it in the spring to give it a season to get established before fall. It will certainly perform a little better if you do that, but I really love it in this location. It's a small magnolia, will stay small up here, and will fill this area. You notice I don't have a whole lot of other trees around it nicely in the front of the house. Other than those two tree change outs, everything else is doing well and is going pretty much as to how I designed it. Now there's some extra shrubs in here that I hadn't originally contemplated in my design. I did not typically or necessarily design with perennials when I was designing the space because it's such a big space, but I've since added lots of alliums, which are one of my favorite perennials, and then some yarrows, echinacea, veronicas, catmints, calamints, and other things that are just really good at drought tolerance. Because although there is irrigation in a lot of this bed, not everything has drip irrigation, and I focused on putting those drought tolerant perennials in those locations. Something else I added to this garden, which I get asked about all the time, is sage. Garden sage is a wonderful perennial. I use it quite a lot. I planted that in spring 2024. I made a big order of it, and I've got it a couple places in the garden. And I'm actually going big on garden sage next year, and I'm planting a hedge of it in front of the Limelight Prime hedge of hydrangeas around the swimming pool. So I went ahead and placed that order for 10, so it'll be about 150 plants next spring from the local garden center that I will pick up in the spring. It's a great alternative to lamb's ear, very similar texture and color. You don't have to worry about the blooms like common lamb's ear, although Helen von Stein has been really nice for me. Helen von Stein can be traditional lamb's ear in general can be a little aggressive though in its spreading habit. And so in places where I want that look, but I don't want the aggression of it spreading so prolifically, I like to put common garden sage. So the perennials and shrubs in here are looking a little rough after a tough summer. Now that we've had our first frost, although it's not been a hard one, I can officially come through and feel better about cutting back the perennials. Now I have historically left a lot of perennial cleanup for spring. There are great reasons to do that. I'm not going to be cutting back all perennials. So there's like grasses and things I will leave. I'll probably leave like the sage, but things that are difficult to get out in time and prune before they start pushing new growth, I'm going to prune. Those things include alliums. Alliums can be really difficult to actually get out when it's cold and clean up before they start pushing new growth. They can start doing that pretty early around here. Salvias and catmints also do the same thing, so those are something I'm going to be doing. Probably the veronicas. Mostly I'll probably just be leaving grasses. Heucheras are fine to leave as well. They'll typically push new growth in the spring that will cover the old growth anyway. And then there'll be probably a few other things I'll take you through and leave if I have time before it gets too cold. This is something I want to accomplish quickly because as a southerner, I do not like being out here in the cold. But because I'm also so busy in the spring, typically with projects, it's very difficult to get out here and get everything cleaned up in time before things get started in the spring. This is a big garden to take care of, and it just requires a lot of things to do. There are a few things I still need to transplant. I never got to transplanting this rose because of the weather. I'm probably still going to do that if I can find a spot for it. I'm still getting a lot of nice rose blooms though. We got some really pretty ones in here. This one is from Heirloom Roses. It's from Louise Clemens, one of the founders of Heirloom. Beautiful orange down here. Speaking of roses in general, a couple things about rose care for fall for me. I'm not doing a whole lot of pruning on roses for fall. I've attempted that in previous years, which I mentioned in another video. I actually attempted it last year. Last year's winter was so bad, we just had a lot of rose dieback, so I'm not going to waste my time pruning things that I'll just have to prune again in the spring. It's repeating a job that is an unnecessary waste of time. The exceptions to that are if you have a fungus on your disease or a fungus on your rose like black spot, you want to remove the foliage, potentially treat that with a fungicide, a curative fungicide, and then maybe you'll want to apply a dormant oil in winter after full frost and things have kind of died back, and then maybe again in the spring to suffocate any spores or insects that may be harboring over. Second, if your roses are really exposed and you didn't plant them deep enough and they're common to rock or blow back and forth in the fall, you may want to trim those back just to prevent them from cane breakage or rocking back and forth and roots getting damaged over winter. Those can be really detrimental to roses too. I also wanted to mention right quick an issue I experienced with one of my roses a few weeks ago, and I reached out to Heirloom Roses about it so I could get clarification that it was not a disease that I had to be concerned about, is something that they described to me as proliferation. So you can see this weird growth on this rose here. It actually has a petal that formed. There were several of them here. They've since fallen off. And then there was only one outside set of petals, and then it shot up a rosebud in the center to form a new rose. This is what they referred to me as rose proliferation. So it can be caused by higher than typical nitrogen fertilizer or too many fertilizer applications on your rose, or it can be caused by large temperature swings. And I was told that you can simply cut that off when that happens. I believe mine was from temperature swings. I didn't really have any fertilizer applied to those roses during that time. But what we did have in early September, right before I started noticing this, is the temperatures dropped. We were having pretty significant lows for the time period. It got in the 50s, highs even in the 60s, which are wonderful. But then it immediately got hot again. High 80s, low 90s about a week later. So we had like a week of cool weather and then got really hot again really quickly. And so I think the stress from those temperature fluctuations caused that issue. But you can just clip it off. I left it for your benefit and to show you it's not something to be concerned about from a disease perspective. Now this bed in the front is obviously not done being designed. There are some things in here that have grown quicker than I expected them to, including this red bud here. And then there's some things that are growing slower or not as well as I thought they would. And so they will end up getting removed and changed. That's something I'm going to focus on next year, is kind of more customizing some of this space for some plants that'll work better for it. I'm considering removing some of this catmint, which seems to get a fungus every year for unknown reasons, other than it must just be susceptible to an issue I have on this property in my garden. So there'll be some work in the spring to do. I'll be pulling out annuals soon, probably this weekend. I like to leave them until we get a hard frost, but I really got to get on it because the temperatures will be changing rather quickly and will not be fun to get outside in. This bed right here was started primarily with cardboard and painters or contractors paper. So I initially started with cardboard. All the boxes that I had saved that we moved to the property with, I ran out eventually because this is such a big area. And then I moved to contractors paper, which I prefer personally. It's a little thinner. It can maintain our typically bluegrass tall fescue, or it can suppress it pretty well. And then it's thick enough that after you put wood chips on it, you can walk on it a little bit, although I have tried to avoid it so you don't tear it and have grass pop through it. So that is a really effective way to create beds in Southwest Ohio and climates where you have cool season grasses like fescues and bluegrass. Those of you that live in climates with like zoysia or what's the other horrible grass? I can't think of the name of it, but mostly warm season grasses tend to be a little more aggressive, and you may end up having to resort to something a little more thick like cardboard. I know one of my friends in Georgia tends to use cardboard a lot, and that works really well for them. Cardboard, you got to typically wait a little longer to plant in it though, because it can just be difficult because it's so thick to actually plant in. I sometimes plant in mine pretty quickly within a couple weeks, and then you may have a little grass pop through. The new hydrangea hedge that I just planted a couple weeks ago, you may have saw the video on that in the last, or the clip on that in the last video or on Instagram. I've since learned that I can basically put a really thick layer of wood chips on the ground, and that is enough to suppress the grass here in certain times of the season, like now when it's not growing quite as quickly and we're heading into fall, or in summer when it's really dry and already stressed out. If you can get out there and create a bed and cover it up, the already stressed grass will die pretty easily if it's covered up with just wood chips. This spring, I worked on a collaboration with the Southern Living Plant Collection, and this bed is new as of this spring. There's some beautiful abelias, a Forever Goldie 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, some ilex. I think the tags are still in here. So this is a holly, touch of gold. You can see its new growth down here is gold. And then we have some beautiful butterfly bushes, which kind of blew me away. This is a little coconut. It's still putting out blooms, but you can see all of the spent blooms it put off this season. Really nice. I've planted in here some perennial geranium to cover the ground as these shrubs kind of get a little bigger, as well as some ajuga down here. I want to make these beds as easy to maintain as possible. So there's shrubs in here that will rarely need pruned except in the spring, like this hydrangea. This is white wedding hydrangea. The butterfly bush will need to be cut back a little bit. The abilias typically don't need a whole lot of pruning unless you're maintaining their size. But I want to cover the ground with things so I don't have to mulch quite as often. This area I did not get to mulching this fall. I'm out of wood chips and I got to get some more in. So we've had a little bit of weed takeover, but I have planted also some geraniums in this space to help me cover the ground when things like these shrubs are still developing. As we head to the back of the property, this bed around the back of the fence was not here. And these trees were not here either. These are green giant arborvitae. I purchased them in the fall of 2023 from a tree auction. They were already pretty large, but green giant grow really quickly. I had them in my last garden. Before those trees were there, there's some stumps, a little bit of leftover stumps that weren't completely ground up from some blue spruce. Blue spruce do pretty terrible in our area. It's pretty common for them to get needle cast without spraying them, and one of them was completely dead and the other two were halfway dead and on their way. So those were some of the first trees we cut down after moving in the fall of 2023, and I wanted to replace them for some privacy a little bit, and green giants were a great option. This late summer I came out and put more wood chips down on this bed and then edged around it to make this a total of an 8-foot walk here that the tractor can still get through nicely if I need to get it in any of these beds. I have not planned to put any plants in this bed yet because green giants grow so quickly. I don't want to plant anything that gets too large in this space that would just have to be removed. But I'm thinking about starting and planting some perennials next year. I think it'd be really beautiful to add some more alliums in here because they're deer resistant. I have seen some deer pressure this fall on some plants, and then I have seen them out and about since the cornfield was cut down looking for a snacky snack. So that's something I haven't dealt with a whole lot during the season, but as we're heading into fall, they're getting a little hungry and looking for food. So the hydrangea hedge on the back of this fence from us in this video is progressing pretty well. Part of it grew a little faster this year than last year. Not sure why that happened, but I'm going to do a little more fertilizing next year than I did this year to hopefully push on the rest of the hedge and get that going. Otherwise, the plants in this bed, there was not a whole lot of design intention going into it. There was some design as I went along and selected the plants and placed them where they're placed, but it was not laid out in advance. I found a plant I liked, a color, a texture that I liked, the height, the structure that I liked, and then I planted them in here. So you'll see some graceful grasses from the Proven Winter series, like this Niagara Falls here. Incredibly beautiful. If you don't have grasses, they're a good option. Some people these days, some designers are incorporating a lot of grasses. Personally, for me, I don't like that many, but they do bring a nice texture in fall with their seed heads and when the wind blows. So really great to incorporate. I've also started incorporating more perennials in this bed too to act as a ground cover because this bed was formed in the spring of 2024 and I have since not put down any more mulch. So there's been a little bit of weed pressure this fall from annual weeds, or this season from annual weeds. Next year I'm hoping to get enough wood chips to come through and mulch this really well again as it gets settled in. But we have more perennial geraniums in here, more calamint that I planted, some ajuga, which will be nice ground covers. There are some couple different varieties of Joe Pye weed that stay shorter and are ornamental, like JoJo and Baby Joe. There are 9 barks of all different shapes, sizes. This is one that I believe is called Fireside. It was on the property before I moved here. There were 2 of them. I did cut them back in the spring and they flushed back really beautifully. So I think that one's Fireside. It looks most like Fireside to me. And then we have spireas that perform really well. 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 𝗦𝘂𝗯𝘀𝗰𝗿𝗲. We got some new crab apples from First Edition Shrubs and Trees. This is green wall spire. I did not have any fruit on mine. The birds ate them up. My friend from Chicago, Heather, from Heather Here She Grows on Instagram and YouTube, has beautiful crab apples. So actually, here's one. It's a little small, but let's see if we can get in there. Right here. But mine, the birds just devoured them, and that tends to be, I have a lot of bird pressure, which is fine. It's why I plant a lot of these plants that produce berries, like my 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲 here. Didn't get a whole lot of berries on it. The birds picked them off incredibly quickly in the spring. But there's lots of other nice things in here that give either texture or fall color. We've got the dark 9-barks that stay pretty dark. They typically sometimes emerge a little lighter in the spring. And then we've still got things that are pushing out blooms, even after we've had a first frost and are heading into winter. Some roses, some vitex, which are new. Something that produced a wonderful amount of berries for me this year is this Proven Winners beauty berry called Pearl Glam, covered up in beautiful purple berries. Last year didn't produce a whole lot, but I planted that one from, I think I purchased it as a 3-gallon. It may have been a 2-gallon, and takes a little bit to get going here on the property with our heavy clay. We've got some weigelas that are still blooming. This is Sonic Bloom Punch, I believe. This is one, the weigelas, I'm going to give them probably a cutback in the spring. That means I may not get any blooms off of them, but I want their growth habit to thicken up a little bit. Another one, beautiful viburnum here. This is Brandywine, has beautiful fall color. There are some berries in here that are kind of a little shriveled up now, but they get both pink and purpley to blue berries. Some beautiful oak leaf hydrangeas that are getting their fall color. Some spireas that are continuing to bloom here. A fluffy arborvitae, more 9-bark and butterfly bushes. And then a sage leaf willow here. This one is from First Edition Shrubs and Trees called Iceberg Alley. Great for cut flower arrangements, but also beautiful throughout the season in the garden. And the newest bed within the past just couple months is this one right here. You can actually see the desert orchid back here that I planted. Looks really rough. I'm not sure that it'll make it. If it doesn't make it, that's okay. It blooms pretty late here, so I didn't even start getting blooms until the end of September, and it only put on a few blooms for me. Not all of the stems had blooms on it this year before I transplanted it, and we've already had our first frost. We'll be having our first freeze within the next week or so. This bed is filled with more hydrangea macrophylla, or big leaf hydrangea for my hydrangea trials. A lot of the same ones that are in my front hydrangea trials bed, so they'll get a little more sun exposure here, which will be nice for comparing them. That also means that they may burn a little more easier, although the soil back here is better than the soil at the front of the property. There are some inkberry hollies in this bed, some more calaments, butterfly bushes, beautiful berry-bearing plants like this new aronia called Berryscape. I've showed it a little bit. It has green berries typically. It's new for next year, and then in the fall, like this would be gorgeous for holiday cutting. It can get 4 to 5 feet tall and wide, I believe, but I don't want to cut on it too much now. I want it to get a little more developed in the garden. Came through a few weeks ago and planted some carex in this bed. I think it's Carex pennsylvanica, to kind of fill out some spaces and cover the ground a little bit. I also planted a lot of summer beauty allium. As I mentioned several times in this video, love an allium. There's all sorts of different alliums on the market that are great. I would recommend, if you're picking one out, make sure it is seedless. One that claims to be seedless, and I have found, and I've spoken to other gardeners like my friend Heather in Chicago, is Millennium. Millennium for me has never been seedless, and it is actually a little bit of a pain. It pops up here and there everywhere where you don't want it, including your lawn. So I would look at alternatives like Serendipity from Proven Winners and some other varieties that are known to be seedless, and do some research on them. I've not had issues with Serendipity popping up anywhere in the garden other than the clumping that it does around. So these down here I planted are called Summer Beauty. They're a different variety. They also are supposed to be sterile. We will see. And in this bed, I also focused a lot on color and textural contrasts. We've got several different trees in here of different color and of different fall color. We've got shrubs in here like Kodiak Fresh 𝗟𝗶𝗸𝗲, which is a bush honeysuckle down here that stay a more vibrant chartreuse color. You can see it's putting on a little bit of fall color here that's red, or new growth that is red. But typically it will be a little more chartreuse and more sun, and it'll be a nice pop of color against some of the other greens and blue colored foliage I have in this spot, including a whipcord arborvitae. So something I'm trying to focus on going forward, or planting a lot more interesting evergreens now that I've filled out a lot with deciduous shrubs. So I'm looking to acquire some of those over the next couple years. Evergreens can be difficult for me to commit to. I love them in winter, but evergreens never stop growing. And so placing them can be kind of a difficult thing. And then you have to worry about some of them grow so slowly. So unless you're forking over a few $100s for a nice substantial evergreen, you're looking at 5 or 6 years before it becomes much of anything in your garden for a lot of different varieties. Not true of everything, but a lot of the beautiful conifers take a pretty good long while to get established. And I try to avoid any of the blue spruces here because of needle casts. And so although they're beautiful in the garden, I don't want to have to spray them with a fungicide regularly and then risk losing them several years down the line because they contracted needle casts. My understanding is if you have fewer spruce on your property, like maybe if I just had one, it might not be as much of an issue, but it's still something that could happen if you're not regularly treating them. And then from there, it just kind of deteriorates. And that is pretty much it. Come a long way in 2 years. I can't believe how much I've got planted or how much I've been able to put in 2 years. A lot of that is helped by free wood chips I got dropped off, and a tractor, and having a machine that I invested in a couple years ago to edge the garden beds for me really quickly. Those tools help a lot on the body and getting things accomplished quickly around the garden. But I understand everyone don't have a tractor or somewhere to put a tractor, and what I would say is focus on skill building each year. Do something different. I was able to get started at this garden pretty quickly because I had built a lot of skills at my last garden. The main one being irrigation, which I talk about a lot, but it's so important with a big garden. I can't spend time out here hand watering this stuff. We tend to have droughts in the summer when we can go weeks with intense heat, sometimes even months without a drop of rain. And so having irrigation that, although if you don't run it all the time, that you can run if it's already in place and that works efficiently, is super important to having a productive and healthy garden, because there's very few things the plant needs: sunlight, nutrition, and water. It's pretty much about it. And if you can't give it all three of those things, it's just not going to perform very well. So we'll end this video. I don't have my drone up, but I'll just show you kind of what we're looking at here compared to where we started. There were some very old dying birch here that looked really bad when we moved in. Those were some of the things we removed pretty quickly too. And then I had the stump ground out, which allowed me to plant lots of other things in its place. But otherwise, pretty much everything in this garden bed, other than the boxwoods and the Japanese maple I mentioned, are all new and only 1 to 2 years old. So thank y'all for joining me for this video. I think it's fun to look back and see how much got done in 2 years. Because it's been 2 years, the next year is the year of leap. And so I'm hoping the things that have been here for the longest, including some of the hydrangeas and things, will really kick it into high gear next year and just provide me a beautiful show. Thank y'all for joining me. And remember, be a light. Take care.